Ecclesiastes chapter 1 this morning. You want to go ahead and be turning there with me. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. As I was studying and preparing for this, one of the commentators that I read said he had a friend that was a Gideon. And we all know that Gideons put Bibles in motel rooms and things like that. And his friend was telling him about all the times that he knew about where somebody had went in the hotel planning on doing themselves harm. And began to read God's Word, and something from the pages of God's Word just leapt out and grabbed them and give them encouragement and hope that they didn't, and then they didn't do anything to themselves. They didn't do what they had planned. But as you look at Ecclesiastes here, you kind of wonder if they'd turned to the first chapter of Ecclesiastes, if it would have been the same outcome. If they would have had the same mindset whenever you first look at this. But as we look at it, we see the author here doesn't give us a whole lot of hope as we begin to look at it. I'm going to begin reading in verse 1. It says, "The works of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun?" You know, as you first begin to read Ecclesiastes here and the things that Solomon, and that's the author of this, Solomon, the things that he tells us here, kind of leads us to think that there's not a lot of hope, that it's kind of, life itself is kind of meaningless, doesn't it? It's kind of futile. Well, as we begin to think about what Solomon done, or the things of Solomon, Solomon wrote 3 books. And they kind of go along with his life as he grows. The first book that he wrote was Song of Solomon. And you get in Song of Solomon and look, and it's about romance and things of that nature. And do you remember how many wives and concubines Solomon had? We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Anybody remember? You're close. 700 wives and 300 concubines. So I guess maybe he knew a little something about romance. I don't know. But anyway, in that early part, Song of Solomon, that's what it was about. You move on into Solomon's life, and we see that he wrote Proverbs. And Proverbs is a guide to us. It's instructions for us to live a Christian life. Instructions from heaven is what that is. And then we get on over into Ecclesiastes here, and we sort of see a regretful retrospective of Solomon's life is what we see. Solomon is in his older years, in his later years of life, and he's looking back and thinking about all the things that he done, all the things that have happened in his life, all the things that he chased after, all the things that he held close, all those things. That's what he's doing. We also know that Solomon, because of these wives, the Bible tells us that his thirst for those things and his thirst for knowledge had sort of pulled his heart away from God. That he didn't follow God the way that he started out. You know, to begin with, Solomon was following God like his father did, like David. And the Bible says David is a man after God's own heart. So we know Solomon was following close, but as time went on, those things began to kind of pull his mind away from God. And he allowed those things to kind of take over, kind of infiltrate his life. We begin to see Solomon's view here of his life, the things that he had done. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking Solomon had the best of everything. And you sort of think about this chapter sort of like we do in our own lives. I mean, we could actually look at this chapter and think, hey, somebody sent this in a letter this week or an email this morning or something of that nature. because it's sort of the same way we look at life. A lot of times we look out at life, and the things that sort of jump out is we got to have the best of everything, right? That's kind of the mindset. That's the things that we desire, or the things that we chase after. And we allow those things to kind of direct our lives. And that's what Solomon done. You know, some people will, because of a certain desire or something that they like to do, they will put themselves in debt. They will work extra, whatever they have to do to get them, whatever that may be, whether it be a boat, a motorcycle, a fancy car, whatever it may be. They will do the things necessary to kind of get that best, you know, the thing that they want, something that they enjoy. And we know Solomon did that. You know, he tells us that he done that. He had the best. He done everything that you could imagine. But he tells us here in these verses, in verse 2, he says, "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities, always vanity." As he's sitting there and he's got the very best of everything. I don't really know how rich Solomon was. The Bible tells us that God multiplied those riches. I was looking at something the other day about the Ark of the Covenant and where it laid, you know, the theories on where it is right now. And one of the things that I looked at said they thought that they had found Solomon's treasure, and it was one of the places that they had hid it was 3,300 tons of gold is what they thought they had found. 3,300 tons of gold. And that was just in one place, and there was two other treasure troves, and they thought that they were better or worth more as the others went on. I don't know how rich he was, but if that would make you happy, surely Solomon was happy, right? He had everything. But as he looks at this, he says it's all meaningless. It's all pointless. It's all vanity. It's no good. It's no good. As I said, he's looking at it kind of like we do sometimes. You know, we have all the best of everything, and yet we look out and we say, what are we doing this for? Why are we going through this hardship? Or why are we going through these things? Why is it that we're doing this? Solomon here, as he looks at this, and as we get to it, he's not looking at this maybe as we think. He's looking at these things as everything under the sun, and that's mentioned several times as we go through. But he's looking at everything under the sun, and he says everything under the sun is vanity. Everything under the sun is vanity. Everything is absolute futility. Everything is fleeting. Therefore, it's pointless, right? He looks at life without God is what he's doing and says it's pointless. There's absolutely no use. On first look, we think Solomon's saying, hey, it's all pointless, but he's looking at a life without God. And he says it's futile, it's pointless, it's vanity. So what's the point in this life? He goes on here and he begins to tell us in verse 3 and 4, I'll read it again. It says, "What profit hath man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever." So, as we look at this book, it kind of tells us, or kind of seems pointless that Solomon, but he's trying to tell us something here as we look at it. So he's asking a question here, kind of like, what are you working for? What is it that you're working for? As I mentioned, a lot of times when we look at everything under the sun, we have those same vanities. We have those same things that we desire. You know, whatever it may be. That we'll put parentheses up there and put that toy that we really like or we really desire. And it could be anything. Or that experience that we really want. You know, maybe go on a cruise or whatever it may be. You know, those things that we really desire. We look at those things, and a lot of times that's exactly what we're working for. A lot of times we can just look a little closer to home, can't we? And we can say, hey, I'm just working, trying to have a home, trying to have the things that we need at home and do those type things. We live in an area where there's been a lot of farms, and a lot of those farms broke up. And as you drive through the countryside, you can be driving along and you can find what used to be a really nice home. It's all grown up with vines, and the doors and the windows are busted out of it, and it's kind of rotten down. It's kind of futile, isn't it, when you think about it? We work our whole lives trying to build something, trying to have something there, and as time goes on, it just begins to rot away. Just begins to go away. And we've lived in our house now since '94, and I'm having to do some things now. You know, you can see that age beginning to creep in on it, and you have to do some upkeep. You have to do some things to try to keep it going, try to keep it where it needs to be. And you just look at that and you think, well, why am I doing this? You know, sooner or later I'm going to be gone. Why am I doing all these things? Somebody else is just going to come in and reap the benefits, right? Somebody else is going to come in and they're going to be able to live in it or sell it or whatever they want to do with it. It's just going to be gone. Why do we do that? And that's kind of the way Solomon is looking at these things. That's kind of the way that Solomon is thinking about this. He says, we go out and we work and we do the things we need to, but we never finish. Anybody in here yesterday get finished with all your work? I'm just asking about yesterday. Did you get finished with all your work? I didn't. There's all kinds of things I need to do. I didn't get finished. And we never will. Tomorrow, when I go to work and come home, I can work on my stuff again, and I still won't be finished. And I won't finish the next day, and I won't finish the day after. I don't care. The day I die, I still won't be finished. There'll be something left there undone, something that I won't have done. It's a never-ending thing. We just go on. It kind of seems like it's just futile. And that's what Solomon's telling us. The work that we do a lot of times is, unless it's for God. You know, those are the things that reap benefit. Those are the things that lay up eternal value. And we don't think about that a lot of times. But Solomon here, as he's trying to get our mindset going, he's saying, hey, the things that are here under this sun, they don't really matter. Unless it's got eternal value, is what he's trying to tell us. In verse 5 there, it says, the sun also arises, and the sun go down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to its circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full unto the place from whence the rivers came. Thither they return again. So here he tells us that things just repeat over and over and over and over. Have you ever had to work on something more than once? Just repeats. How many times this year have you mowed your yard? Why is that? Boy, it'd be a lot easier just let that yard grow up, the weeds take it, and just kind of live behind them, wouldn't it? That'd be a lot easier. But we want things to look good, and we do things that kind of just repeat, don't we? All the water runs to the sea, but does the sea overflow? Does it ever get full? We see all these things happening in repetitive motion, but they just kind of keep going on and on and on, doesn't it? Again, it just seems senseless unless God is in it. It just kind of seems senseless. In verse 8 there, it says, all things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see this new thing? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come, with those that shall come after. So here he tells us that nothing satisfies. He says, you see, you look, but your eyes are not satisfied. I told Kay on the way up here, I said, if you're wanting to see the leaves, we need to get that done, because time's coming on. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but the trees are getting beautiful. I noticed that Friday whenever I went over into Virginia and picked up something. But I noticed that the trees there along that mountain ridge was just beautiful. And it's going to be gone before you know it. But do you ever get tired of looking at those things? I looked at them last year. I like to look at them. I like to see it again. In the springtime, I like to get out and walk around those trees that all the leaves are gone on and begin to see those little buds. You know, as the leaves begin to come out. I want to see that. I want to see those things. Our eyes never get tired of seeing, do their ears never get tired of hearing. You know, he tells us that nothing seems to satisfy. And think about this. Who is this coming from? Nothing seems to satisfy. This is coming from Solomon, who had the best of everything. He had the best food. He had the best houses. He had the best horses. He had the best women. He had the best of everything. He had the most beautiful women that were ever known in those areas. 1,000 of them. He had the best of everything. And he's telling us that nothing satisfies. Nothing under the sun satisfies. He had those 700 wives and 300 concubines, and that didn't satisfy. That drives me nuts. But it didn't satisfy. He goes on here in verse 12. And he said, I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. And I gave my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man, to be exercised therein. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. So he tells us here that knowledge doesn't give fulfillment. You know, when you think about Solomon, that's what he was after. You know, we know Solomon is the wisest man ever. But his heart desired that knowledge. That's part of the reason he had 1,000 wives. Because all these come from different cultures, different backgrounds, different things that they had in their life. And he was curious. He was curious about those things that came in there. So that's where part of that came from. He was seeking that knowledge. And if you think about it, he had opportunity to have his hands on anything that was available. If he wanted it, he could have it. He could study it. He could look at it. He could read it. He could have anything there. And he tells us here now that knowledge doesn't give fulfillment. It just leaves you yearning for more, is what he's telling us. Just leaves you desiring more in your life. And I've noticed that. And when I was a lot younger, I liked to go fast. And as I learned what to do to make things go fast, it never ended. I wanted to go faster. So I had a desire for more learning to make things go faster. You know, it was just never ending. I wanted to go faster and faster and faster, and I had to learn from all those things to get there. He says it just leaves you wanting more. It just leaves you wanting more. He tells us here, for Solomon here, the more that he learned, the emptier he felt. With all that knowledge, he could not find a purpose for life under the sun. In verse 16, he says, I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience in wisdom and knowledge. And I gave my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is vexation of spirit. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. So he tells us here in these verses that he searched. He searched everywhere. He looked everywhere he could to grow that knowledge, to have that knowledge. And the only thing he ever found was shortcomings. The only thing he ever found was heartache. The only thing he ever found was a knowledge that he was now responsible for what he learned. You see, an increase in knowledge always brings responsibility. John chapter 15, verse 22 says, If I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not had sin. But now they have no cloak for their sin. This is Jesus' words. He says, if I had not come, they had an excuse. They could say, I didn't know. I didn't know I had sin in my life. I didn't know that I was doing things that I shouldn't have been doing. I didn't know. But he said, now I've spoke to them. Now they know that they have sinned. Now they ain't got nowhere to hide. You're responsible now. With that knowledge comes responsibility. Now when we look at this, as I said to begin with, a lot of things that we first notice, we think maybe Solomon is unhappy or pessimistic or things of that nature. He's not. He's not unhappy. He's not pessimistic. He's sitting there looking back on his life. And, I've seen many accounts as I've read different things where people have stopped when they were up in years, and they've stopped and they've looked back and they've said, what value has been my life? What value has been my life? May have grown to great fortune. May have done great things in this world. But what value is there when you look back? Those fortunes will fade. The Bible tells us that everything that we know will perish one of these days. That the clothes that I have at the house, if the moths don't eat them before I leave this place, then somebody will sell them in a yard sale, or they'll pick through them and take home what they want, or whatever it may be. All those things will be gone. I'm going to leave with the same thing I come in with. When you get right down to it. Everything else, what does it mean? Everything else, what good is it? That's kind of where we see Solomon here as he's looking back. Now, if you'll remember, as we talked about Solomon, we've seen the 3 stages of his life. That middle section of his life, when he was seeking those things of God, when he was striving to do those things, we see him growing closer and closer. And he gives us those instructions through Proverbs, those heavenly instructions that he got from God that help us in our daily walk. But he got tangled up, didn't he? He got tangled up, and now he's looking back and he's thinking, well, if only, if I could have, maybe I should have. I've looked at all these things under the sun, and they've been, that's kind of where he's at, looking at all those things. But we also have to realize here that Solomon is viewing life from ground level. I remember in my life when I was viewing life from ground level. When the only thing I ever saw was what was right in front of me. The things that I desired, the things that I wanted, the things that drew my attention, those things were ground level. And I remember no matter what was there, it wasn't enough. Now, I already told you that I had a need for speed. I had the desire for those things, and I had to increase that knowledge to figure out how it didn't matter. No matter how fast I went, it wasn't fast enough. Didn't matter what I had, I want something else. Those were the things that drew my desire. If I had one gun, I wanted 2. If I had 2 bullets, I wanted 4. Those were the things that drove me. Because I was looking at ground level. And it wasn't until I knelt down beside my bed and looked up that I ever figured out that those things at ground level are just vanity. See, that's what Solomon is telling us. We look at all this through this first chapter here, and you look at it and you think, well, Solomon's just telling us everything we do is useless. Everything we do is of no account, of no accord. We might as well not do anything. But that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is everything that we're doing here on ground level, one of these days will pass away. One of these days will have absolutely no meaning. But if we're looking above that ground level, if we're looking up, those things have meaning. Now, I told you when I left this place, I'd leave with the same thing I come in. The only difference is going to be I'll be a child of God. because he saved my soul. He came and lived in my life. It's because I knelt down and I looked up. I looked above that ground level theory, that ground level mindset. I began to think of those things that had spiritual value, not those things that were without spiritual value. Now, if you look at life and you think about it from those perspectives, life is kind of pointless. But if you look up, it changes everything, doesn't it? That pointlessness should drive us to find meaning in our life. In the end, the search leads us up. Now the thing is, are we tired of wandering around in pointlessness? And when I got to the point where I got on my knees and I looked up, I was tired of wandering around in pointlessness. I was tired of being where I was at. My search ended with God. All those things that didn't fulfill, all those things that left me void, all those things that no matter what I had or what I done, I always wanted more, I become satisfied. Because the only satisfaction we can have is in God. That's the only satisfaction. Living for God is the only true way to find joy. So we have to ask, are we living for God? Are we wandering through this world, kind of like Solomon did here? Are we wandering through this world and we're trying everything that this world tells us is going to bring us pleasure, going to bring us prosperity, going to bring us to the point where we're just so happy? Or are we looking up? Are we looking above that ground level view? See, because the only way we're going to find what we're looking for is to look up and allow God to rule our lives and experience that true joy that only He can give. Are you experiencing that today? If you would stand with me.